Desmos and try different numbers.
Rumble. Tried it like 3 times. We went over it like 3 times. The first one actually.
So, alright, we're gonna get started here. If it's not in Socrative, I'll give you a little more time to plug it in. We're not gonna go over it though, because I don't want to give anybody free answers. Alright, so, this example on our warm-up here is actually going to be kind of the point of this whole chapter. So it's actually going to be really similar to last chapter, but at the same time, it'll be we'll have a little extra. Not to start with, but eventually it'll be like that. So, we are going to do AC factoring a little bit this chapter, we are going to do in-middle factoring, so keep that in mind. Alright. To start with though, it's going to be a little easier. So, don't forget, especially now that we're doing lessons, if you get up randomly during a lesson, it's a strike. If I got to tell you to be quiet more than once, it's a strike. Don't ruin it. Okay. So this whole chapter is about quadratic functions, and specifically quadratic functions in standard form. So a quadratic function in standard form looks like ax squared plus bx plus c. We've already talked about this. You guys remember when we did ABC factoring? We had a and then b and then c, right? So you guys have been working with quadratic. So a quadratic is a polynomial where the biggest exponent is 2. That's what a quadratic is. And when we graph them, they're going to look something like this. They're either going to look like a U, or sometimes they get flipped upside down and they look kind of like a, I don't know, a hill or maybe an N. Not that imaginative. So they just either look not that much. So it's either going to look like a U or like a mountain. Okay? This is a special kind of shape, so it's not a straight line like we've done before. And this shape is called a parabola.
What?
So that's what this shape is called, a parabola.
When'd you make that one up, Bo?
I feel like I just gave up on the name called
Dude, why do we have to do this?
Dude, pass my mouse.
Yeah.
Actually, no. This.
8 out of every 5.
Yeah. Yes, Jay.
You're doing some balance, huh? And then I'm not going
Raise
to
your
read
hand.
it.
Will you sharpen the pencil?
Wait, so
No, it's fine.
next
Sharpen
week,
that one.
nobody has strikes?
Maybe. Or maybe I'll just take one out. You just take
Who
one
has
out.
two?
I don't have any.
Him and Willis.
Loki, you're just buffering.
Okay, man.
Can I move up?
Alright.
How can you not?
So, every parabola that we look at, and on these, I accidentally, real quick, on parabolas, you know how when you draw lines, you've got arrows on the end? Same thing with parabolas, but when I made these, I accidentally deleted my arrows.
Yeah.
Put little arrows on the end here real quick.
You only 14.
Make these actual parabolas.
Yeah.
Alright, so every parabola has what is called a vertex.
That's a strike.
Alright. Every parabola has a vertex, which is the highest or lowest point. Your very highest or very lowest. So it depends on which way your parabola is. So if you have a highest point, we usually call that the maximum, or just max. If you have a lowest point, we call it a minimum, or min. You know, pretty straightforward. You guys know what a maximum and minimum is.
Maximum power.
You all passed kindergarten. Actually, no, that's probably.
Actually, no.
Greg, turn it on.
I thought it was Max.
I held back.
Actually,
Turn your video on. Okay, so if I'm looking at this little parabola here on the left,
No.
my vertex,
It's minimum.
Sorry.
minimum.
What did I just say? Josh?
No, I was just reading.
Okay, on this left parabola, my vertex is my very lowest point right here. And this is going to be a min. And when we talk about vertex, we want to give an x, comma, y coordinate. So all vertex is going to be an x, comma, y. Which today, for the most part, we are just going to look at it and figure out the x, comma, y. Yes, it will. Okay, so on this vertex right here, it is at 1, comma, I'm not going up and down, so it's 0. My vertex is at 1, comma, 0 here. Remember, it's just an x. y coordinate is all it is for your vertex. So on this one right here, my vertex is going to be a maximum, because it's my very highest, right? So it's going to be a max. And my coordinate is going to be at -1, -2, -3, -4, comma 1, 2, 3. That is my location of my vertex. And we aren't going to get into a lot of this yet, but we are going to kind of start off. So, in my standard equation of a parabola right here, my standard equation of a quadratic, if a, the very first thing by x squared, if it's less than 0, without even looking at the graph, you know that it will be a maximum. You will have a maximum, because when a is less than 0, your parabola is flipped upside down. So normally it looks like a U, but if a is less than 0, or if it's a negative, it's going to be flipped upside down, and you're going to have a maximum. And the opposite of that, if a is greater than 0, you're going to have a minimum, because your parabola is going to look like normal, like a normal U. Like a hill. Yeah, hill. Maximus a hill. Alright, so we are going to go through and we're just going to practice finding some vertexes to start with. So I'm going to look at this one right here. On part A, my vertex is right here.
Maximum.
And let's actually label, is this a max or a min?
Maximum.
It's maximum, right? That part's pretty easy. Alright, and I'm also going to label my coordinate, which is at, am I going left or right at all?
No.
Which means x is what?
0.
0. Comma, then I got to go up 1, 2, 3, and it's at 0, 3. Okay? On part B, I have my vertex right here. Is it max or min?
Min.
Min. It's not min. I almost wrote that though. Nice.
Silly donkey.
Alright, and my xy coordinate, let's see, right 1, 1 for my x, I'm going down 1, -1. Alright, not too bad so far. First in-class problem, find the vertex, and tell me, is it a max or a min?
It's a min.
Tell me, what's the vertex, and is it max or min?
Okay, I'm done.
What? I don't believe it.
I'm done.
Alright, Luis, is it a max or min?
It's a maximum. No, it's a min.
It's like, are you sure about that? Alright, it is a minimum. Yep. Alright, a second. Alright, so this is a minimum, and we gotta find our vertex, which is an x comma y, right? So I'll give you a second to finish that off. I'll give you the easy part already. Yeah. Other way around. Yeah, other way around. And that goes first. So that we
That's going to be hard.
Alright, so we have a minimum, and then we need to find our vertex here, which is just an x comma y. My vertex is my very lowest point. And what is that coordinate? Let me pick somebody random. Oh, nobody's in that desk. Beto, what's my vertex at?
What? Let's turn right.
You okay back there, Jace?
I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I'm asking you to tell everybody.
Is that a syringe?
Just real quick.
It's
It's like 4 syllables. Alright, what's my vertex at,
Did I
Beto?
say 4?
-2, -3. Maybe you'll get the next one later. Alright. And then don't forget, that actually does remind me, whenever you talk about vertex, it is an x comma y, so you need your parentheses.
After the lesson. He said it already.
It's gonna be in a cup.
Oh! Alright, so we looked at a vertex So every parabola also has what is called an axis of symmetry, which I usually abbreviate as AOS because that is way too much for me to write. So your axis of symmetry is a line that cuts your parabola in half. But I forgot to say it's an invisible line. It's not actually there when we look at it,
I made a line.
but it is there.
It's not invisible anymore.
Is it a line that or?
Line that.
That is it's a
Line
line.
that. I mean, it was that the whole time. What are you talking about? Line that cuts the parabola in half. So, if I'm going to look at this first parabola over here, my vertex is right here in the middle, right? So even though it's not on here, if I'm going to draw a line right through my vertex, straight up and down line, right through my vertex, this line cuts the parabola in half.
Why is this used?
So, if you were to fold, like if this was on a piece of paper and you folded it directly along this line, both halves of your parabola would match up. So, or another way to look at it, alright, if I have this point right here, it is 1, 2 away from this line, right? If I go 1, 2 again, I get to that same point. In other words, that's how it works. So, when we talk about an axis of symmetry though, whenever we write it down, because axis of symmetry is a line, it is always x equals, and then whatever your x coordinate is. So this x coordinate is at -2, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be x equals -2 is your axis of symmetry. And I'll give you a hint.
You're right there.
What?
Okay, looks like it says the American name for a donkey.
Yeah,
See?
that's what
Oh, there you go.
Fine, here, I'll even fill it in.
But that's not always.
You know,
Now that's
yeah,
just
now you have to
as.
edit.
You're gonna have to delete it and write it all over again.
The maturity level in this class is just...
Junior said it.
Middle school, man.
Alright, I know it, man. May as well be a subgroup.
Okay.
Okay,
Freshman, right?
so our axis of symmetry is at x equals -2. So keep in mind, for your AOS, it is always x equals. And for your axis of symmetry, what, okay, actually let me back up. If I was going to say, what's the vertex of this, what is my coordinate of the vertex? -2, too, right? The axis of symmetry is always the same as the x of the vertex. So if you find your vertex, you also found your axis of symmetry. They're exactly the same. So when I say find the vertex and axis of symmetry, you did all the work after you find the vertex. Because that's always the same thing as the x in your vertex.
Wait, what's the A?
Axis of symmetry.
No.
What do you mean?
Let's do
I'm
it.
confused. What do you mean, like, don't we have to find if it's greater than or less than?
Oh no, that doesn't matter.
Wait, how'd you
Yes,
get?
that part doesn't matter. Okay, so let's look at this next one over here. My arrows got deleted again. I should probably remake these. Okay, my vertex is right here, right? My axis of symmetry is going to go right through that. And I usually do it as a dashed line just so I know it's my axis of symmetry. So my AOS is going to be an x equals. If you don't put x equals, you are technically wrong. So always put x equals, because axis of symmetry is a line, not just a number.
Do we have to write AOS with the 2 little
If you're answering more than one thing, yes, so I know what you're answering. Yeah.
Oh my god.
So if I say find the vertex and axis of symmetry, do v equals, and then put your vertex, and then do AOS equals, and then do x equals after. So you gotta do them both. Okay, and on this, it's gonna be the same as my x and my vertex. The x and my vertex is 1, 2, 3. That's my AOS. You got a question, Gabe?
I'm gonna sharpen my pencil.
Right, go ahead. Okay. Okay, there's Greg.
What's the axis of
Hand, we
symmetry?
get out there?
Yeah.
He gets done with that part. He gets done at the end.
Alright, so let's practice a couple of things real quick.
What did you just say? Full lesson?
Just in case I'm gonna lose.
Please. Thank you. Come on, man. I'm totally good.
Please, didn't I tell you quiet ones?
You have to wake up.
Dude, how would
I
it
gotta
be?
tell either one of you guys. Alright,
Literally just close my eyes as you want.
so on this one my vertex is right here, and the x of my vertex is 0. That's what my axis of symmetry is.
Doing it with my AUS?
On this one,
AUS?
you really only need to label if I'm asking more than one thing.
Oh.
So, because I'm just saying what's my axis of symmetry, I don't need to label it, because I know that's all I'm answering. So, on this one, axis of symmetry, right here in the middle, right? It is going to be at x equals, the x of my vertex is 1, so it's going to be at x equals 1. Next in class problem, find the AOS of this parabola. Your parabola.
Parabola. What's that parabola? I don't know what it's on. Alex.
Yeah, what's that?
Remember? Better.
Okay, put the x in your vertex. Whatever one you're on. This one's sure. What's the x in your vertex? What is the x in the vertex? Okay, this is an x number 1, right? What's the x number? So your AOS is x equals 1.
Lily, we're just doing that.
It's up under my eyes.
Lily, this one would just be
Negative 2.
so we don't even have to worry about the
It's
y.
negative 2, huh?
For AOS, it's just the
No, it's negative 1, Alexander. Shut up.
Yeah. Alright. So let's pick somebody random for this one. Eeny, meeny, miny, the calculator chooses Alzea. Alright, it's x equals what?
Negative. It wouldn't get
Negative 2. What is the x in your vertex right here?
3, negative 3.
No, flip down. You just did the y.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, it goes x comma y.
That's what our next
You did y comma x.
What, Junior?
X is this one. Y is this one. When you do an x comma, when you do a coordinate, it's always the x first. So you've got the right numbers. They're just flipped around. Yeah. All right. So we got one last thing. So we are also going to look at the domain and the range, which we've talked about before. Anybody remember what domain is?
The X is listed from
Yep.
smallest to biggest, but don't recommend.
Yep. Got those results memorized.
No, I just went over my notes.
Okay. That's good. That's good. All right. So in other words, your domain is your x's, your x values, and your range is your y values, right? Well, we're not going to list them like we did before. What we're going to do is we are going to list them, but we're not going to list them individually. So let's look at part A here. My domain is my x values.
Yeah.
On this, are there any x values? So as you look at this graph, is there any x value you will never get to?
Yeah.
Like what?
Like
Negative 1 is right here.
Yeah, it's like right there, dude.
Yeah. So as I go through, like if I were to list every single coordinate on here, is there any point where I would never list an x value?
Oh, wait. No.
All right.
Yeah.
So let me rephrase. Like if I have 4, will I ever list 4 comma something?
Oh, no.
Yes, because this graph is going to keep going this way.
That's
It's
what I
going to keep
say.
going on forever this way.
It's not on
And
the
it doesn't
graph.
go very quick, but it's going to keep going forever.
Not on the graph.
So we're going to get to every single x, right? So the way we talk about domain is I'm going to say my domain is going to be all real numbers because x, it will always go through an x. Every parabola we will look at will always have an x. So my domain, I'm going to say is all real numbers, which I'm going to abbreviate as ARN. Because I'm lazy and I don't like writing that much.
Lazy too.
I know. See, I actually get my work done. Bird shot. Make a YouTube highlight video. Birds. Call it a compilation.
Bulky.
So, my domain is all real numbers.
Bulky.
You're recording.
Don't get me started.
Okay.
Welcome back to the-
You're recording?
Hey guys,
Yes.
back to
Do you edit this?
channel.
No,
Oh.
Yeah, you can hear all of us in there.
it's really
Yeah.
annoying.
You can really do. What do you think right now?
Did you try to do
Alright.
it
Hey
before?
guys,
What?
Did you try to
welcome
do it
back with
before?
another video.
No, I just.
And I'm here talking
Alright.
about domain. and-
So we are almost done. Hush. My range. So is my y values. So if I look at graph A here, are there any y values that don't show up? Every x will show up, right? Is there any y that doesn't show up?
The 2 and up.
Close. 3 and up. That's at 3, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
same thing.
So if I'm going to look at 4, is this graph, so we talked about parabolas, right? The arrows mean they're going down this way. Is it ever going to loop back up and
No.
get way up higher?
No.
So those arrows means it goes forever that way. So my range is a little different. So range talks about y's, right? Okay, so I'm going to start with y. And my maximum y, or my maximum y is 3, right?
Yes.
Are all my y's greater than or less than 3?
Less.
Less than 3. So I'm going to say my range is going to be y is less than, and I'm also going to say or equal to 3. Because every y at 3 or less, I will get to eventually.
I need to go to the office.
Almost done.
I can wait.
Our last slide. Alright, let's look at part B. So, my domain,
Would you like us to
on every single one of these, what is my domain going to be, Manjay?
Huh?
What's my domain going to be in this one?
Have a look at it.
Probably a good idea.
It's gonna be a Arn, yeah.
Yeah, way to go, Manjay friends. Alright,
What can I say?
every single domain will always be all real numbers. Because we are only looking at regular parabolas, we're not looking at any weird ones, so it's always going to be all real numbers. So your domain is kind of boring. Range is more interesting though. So I'm going to start with y, and then I need to figure out what's my biggest or smallest y. Well, my smallest y is -1, right?
Yes.
-2 or -1.
-1. Is my parabola, is it everything less than -1 or greater than -1?
Greater.
So I'm going to make my greater than sign, and on all of these, because I actually go through -1, I'm going to do or equal to. So y is greater than or equal to -1.
-1.
Yeah. Alright, last one.
Wait.
Okay.
No,
It's okay, I will stop everything to help you.
Wait, how do you do this again?
How'd you get the equal to?
Because it goes exactly through -1.
Oh, it's not like up there.
Yeah, it's not like just a tad above it. So it goes through exactly.
If it's greater than that one, on that side.
So if it goes up, it goes this way, it goes
Yeah. So if it's greater than, these are going up. So that's my greater than. If it's going down, it'll be less than.
Okay.
Alright, next thing, actually last in-class problem, I want you to tell me what is the domain and what is the range.
Domain.
It's okay.
Get ahead, Lily. Rumble, rumble, rumble.
How do you say
Good students.
after this? Can I go?
Yeah.
Teacher, I did this right, the last problem, the text
Hey, did I do right?
You realize you did way more work than you needed to.
What?
You said it's the maximum. Okay, this means that without even knowing what the equation is, A is greater than or less than 0.
Oh, I was reading this and I just read find the vertex maximum
And then the
vertex
vertex
and
is that. So you didn't have to do
domain. Sorry.
No, it's fine. You're not wrong.
Okay, I didn't know.
Where do we need to, Lily?
I understand. What'd you get for the?
Which ones?
This
Fine.
one?
You're right.
-3.
I don't understand like.
Why is
the sign.
oh, okay. All real numbers
Yeah, so on
and
this,
then
so
y is greater than or less than -3.
so it's going to be -3.
How'd you get -3? Not equal
Does the
to.
graph, is it everything
Greater than or equal to.
Yeah. Because it's on the negative.
Greater.
It goes down, obviously.
Oh.
So on this
Are you
one,
talking to me?
Yeah.
So it's technically. No, but on the X, it's -2. Oh, we're trying to find the Y, huh?
Okay, just right here, because your line's going a different way, the sign would be flipped.
you are right. You're right.
Goalkeeper, I'm right.
Got -3. What'd you get?
It's the same one for that B
over
or the second one.
After we learn about this, we're gonna learn about something
Can I go to office now?
Yeah, just a minute.
That's how it usually goes. Exactly. Watch. You guys are gonna learn.
All right, it's looking good. We're not going to go over it because everybody I checked got it right. Unless you guys want to go over it.
Wait, did I get it wrong?
That's the exit to my eight.
Oh, that's correct.
All right, that's it. So, our domain, actually, I'll have you guys, just to make sure. All right, on this one, Gabe, what's my domain? Yep. And be lazy and go iron. And then my range is what? I already called on Beto. Ivory, what's my range? What? You wanted to be called on.
Why?
Yeah.
Little-
Yeah, greater than. Why are you equal to?
Yeah, that's you. And negative 6.
I got
So that's greater than?
Good job.
And greater than it's going to the y, right?
Yes.
Less than it's away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh.
This one is greater. And then the other way is nope.
Okay.
Should I write that down?
Yeah, balance. All right, that's it. So, if you haven't yet, start on your exit ticket. I'm turning on Scrative, and I'll put your homework on
It's
there.
like an L.
And remember, only certain people get to listen to music. People with high enough grades and no strikes.
Great. Underscore.
Mm.
Ah, Loki.
Lucky just wants to see me.